Welcome everyone. Today we've got a presentation that's giving a brief introduction to the Bhagavata Purana or the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the reason we are giving an introduction today is because going forward, the last week of our Thursday sessions, the last week of the month of our Thursday sessions is going to be dedicated to verses and themes from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we're kind of starting it off with a little introduction, and then we'll kick off a series where you'll have different presenters sharing insights from particular verses from the text itself. So to start off with, let's go into what we're discussing today. And we've got three main points that we want to address. The first is, what is the Bhagavata Purana? The second is the significance of the Bhagavata Purana. And the third is the message of the Bhagavata Purana. So hope you're all excited. Let's start with, what is the Bhagavata Purana? So as I said, it's also known as the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad means beautiful, wonderful, opulent, and Bhagavatam means relating to God or the absolute truth. And this text is composed in Sanskrit. There are 12 cantos, 18,000 verses, so it's a very comprehensive text. I've heard some people describe it as like an encyclopedia or an encyclopedic kind of text because of how detailed it is and structured it is.
Certainly as big as an encyclopedia.
Yes, yeah, it is. And yes, it's an epic philosophical and literary exposition of Vedic knowledge. And we'll go into what we mean by Vedic knowledge in a couple of slides. So yeah, put a pin in that. And this knowledge, it was preserved through oral tradition, but then it was first put into writing by Vyasadeva. And we have the great sage Vyasadeva pictured here. I think you had some points on Vyasadeva.
Yeah, Vyasadeva is considered an incarnation of an empowered incarnation of Krishna, the absolute truth. But even from a non-sectarian point of view, Vyasadeva is revered across all the Vedic traditions as the authority. So his works are relied upon and reference and form the foundation of many traditions, philosophical and religious, spiritual traditions coming out of India. So he is a monumental figure in the history and the ongoing proliferation of Indian philosophy.
Okay, this is his domain. Don't be alarmed. We'll explain. So I did say we'll go back to what we mean by Vedic knowledge, and Sankarsana is going to do just that because.
So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is just to give some context to the Srimad Bhagavatam, how it fits within the whole framework, the whole paradigm of Vedic knowledge. So what you have here is a kind of a schematic, a chart that captures at a high level all the main areas or components of Vedic literature, the canon of Vedic literature. And I'm going to just highlight a few key parts of it as they relate to the Srimad Bhagavatam. So at the very top level, Vedic literature, Vedic knowledge is kind of segregated into two broad sections. You have Shruti and you have Smriti. And Shruti comes from the Sanskrit. It's a Sanskrit word, and it indicates that which is heard. So it's revealed knowledge. It's considered revealed knowledge. It's scripture. And then Smriti is another Sanskrit term, and it indicates that which is remembered. So it's sort of in the tradition of writing down and giving expositions, elaborations on Shruti. So you have these two categories of literature in the Vedic canon. But what I want to draw your attention to is on the left side, on Shruti, you have these various texts or various subcategories of literatures highlighted there. But I want to pinpoint, I want to highlight Veda, the Vedic, the far left, the 4 Vedas in particular. And for all the Vedic traditions, this is the ground, this is the foundation of their traditions, it's the foundation of all knowledge, and it's considered to be the ultimate testimony, perfect testimony of knowledge. So in the Vedic system, you generally have different ways of receiving knowledge. You can receive knowledge through your sense perception. You can receive knowledge through your reasoning faculties. And you can receive knowledge through testimony, the statements of various authorities. So the Vedas are considered the absolute testimony. And they're considered especially, this is very important because according to the Vedic traditions, the absolute truth is beyond our capacities, the limits of our reasoning. So the means of acquiring all the way to understanding ultimate reality. So the only remaining source of information would be Vedic knowledge, according to this tradition. And we have these, if you look to the left there, the 4 at the bottom, these are 4 different sections of the Vedas. But I want to highlight in particular the Upanishads, the last one, down at the bottom. So on the bottom left, you have the Upanishads. And that's considered the philosophical segment of the Vedas. A lot of the Vedas are dealing with various types of rituals and systems. But then there is a section of the Vedas toward the end of the Vedas, called the Upanishads, and they deal with knowledge of the absolute truth, ultimate reality. And it's very high philosophy. And you could say that the Upanishads form the foundation of a wide diversity of philosophical traditions. And because there's all these various apparently, and you might say apparently conflicting themes in the Upanishads, different types of statements that you might find difficult to reconcile because of the subject matter, you have Vyasadeva, who we mentioned earlier, writing what's called the Vedanta Sutra. Now, Vedanta refers to, Veda means knowledge, Anta means the end. So Vedanta is referring to the Upanishads, that last portion of the Vedas. And Vyasadeva, what he did was he put down this text called the Vedanta Sutras. And a sutra is just a concise statement, very short, concise, but dense. And it's part of Indian tradition to write in sutras because there's all these different ideologies and philosophies in India, and each one of them has their sutras, and that sutra captures in very succinct form what the essence of that particular tradition is. So we have the Vedanta Sutras, which purport to capture the true essence and meaning of the Upanishads. But because they're very concise and very, very short, there's a lot of room for interpretation there in a sutra text. And because of that, Vedanta itself has spawned many different interpretations. And there are many different people who write commentaries on the Vedanta Sutras itself to elaborate what they think the Upanishads is trying to say. What's the philosophy that's really in there? So you have different great teachers or acharyas presenting their interpretations of the Vedanta Sutra, which is itself a concise summary of what's contained in the Upanishads, which is itself the culminating philosophical portion of the Vedas, which is considered revealed knowledge. That's the thread. Now, just to wrap up now, where does the Srimad Bhagavatam or the Bhagavata Purana sit in this? So you have all these different commentaries on the Vedanta Sutra. But those who are familiar with the wide breadth of work in Vedic literature, they'll be aware that Vyasadeva himself wrote his own commentary on his own Vedanta Sutra. And that's why when you consider, when we look at the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in whose tradition we are coming from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's tradition, that particular line of Vedanta philosophy. And he makes the point, and he emphasizes the point that this particular tradition historically didn't see much need in presenting its own commentary on Vedanta sutras, because Vyasadeva himself already offered that. And he offered that in the form of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So that is what the Srimad Bhagavatam is. It is a commentary by the same author of the Vedanta Sutras, which is itself a concise systematization of the Upanishads, which is itself the philosophical portion of the Vedas, which is revealed knowledge coming from divine reality. So that is what the Srimad Bhagavatam is. So it's one, if you look towards the right, you will see a box called Puranas under the Smriti. And there's 18 major Puranas and 18 minor Puranas. And some say there's some others as well. But the Srimad Bhagavatam is one of the Puranas. It is called the Bhagavata Purana. And it's a profound literature that's revered across India and now revered all over the world by the efforts of Srila Prabhupada, who gave everything he had to not just translate, but translate in a very academic, systematic, attractive way. In English, this knowledge that was existing for millennia in India and had never crossed its boundaries, he has distributed that across the world. So we now have an English translation and commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it's that text that we want to focus on in these sessions that Rashmi talked about.
Yes, so that is like that's the significance of the Bhagavata Purana. That's what we're trying to target here by going through where it comes from in the ocean that is Vedic knowledge. And we've got some statements that follow that. Thank you. So from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we have two statements. The first is the Vedanta Sutra is the summary of all the Upanishads. Therefore, whatever direct meaning is there in the Upanishads is also recorded in the Vedanta Sutra or Vyasa Sutra. So that's what Sankarsana was saying about how it links to the Upanishads, how the Vedanta Sutra links to the Upanishads. And then following that, the Srimad Bhagavatam gives the meaning of the Vedanta Sutra, the actual meaning of the Vedanta Sutra. The author of the Vedanta Sutra is Vyasadeva, and he himself has explained those aphorisms in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavata Purana.
And this is such a significant point. If for anyone familiar with Indian philosophy, there are very diverse and very, very different interpretations of the Vedanta Sutra. And for centuries, great thinkers, powerful thinkers have been combating it out in the battlefield of Indian philosophy to elucidate what is the real meaning of the Upanishads, what's actually revealed there, what is the true import of the Upanishadic statements and Vyasadeva's Vedanta Sutra. Because the significance there is that this is where the authority lies. For any tradition, for any Vedic tradition that wants to be respected, they have to demonstrate that they are actually in line with the Vedanta Sutra and the Upanishads, because otherwise they're just some rogue, some random person with his own opinions. Whereas if you could demonstrate that you're anchored within the Vedic tradition by being completely in line with the Vedic statements in the Upanishads and Vedanta Sutra, then you elevate your philosophy to a level of legitimacy that will earn you and earn your tradition followers and respect, and you will be able to, at least for those in the tradition, you'll be able to offer the world the highest knowledge. So it's very important to be able to show how your teachings or your views align with the Vedanta Sutra. But what's significant here is that what it seems many people don't really recognize is that the author of the Vedanta Sutras has himself offered us an elaboration of what the Vedanta Sutras are, and that is the Srimad Bhagavatam. So for anyone who's really interested in understanding Vyasadeva, you must take seriously what the Srimad Bhagavatam says, because that is Vyasadeva in his maturity, explaining really what he wanted to communicate in the Vedanta Sutras. And that's why Lord Chaitanya makes that point that we didn't really have a need to do that. Vyasadeva already did that work. Later on, though, the tradition did have a need when it was challenged. Our tradition was challenged as illegitimate. And one of our great teachers took on the great task of producing a commentary on the Vedanta Sutras, and that was Baladev Vidyabhushana. And if you read Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada is a person who brought Krishna consciousness all over the West. He pays tribute to Baladev Vidyabhushana for this monumental service, because it brought legitimacy to the tradition when it was being challenged historically. But anyway, I spoke along with that. These verses demonstrate just how important the Srimad Bhagavatam is within the canon of Vedic knowledge.
Yes, how significant it is. And yeah, as we said, the Srimad Bhagavatam is a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, which and the Bhagavatam provides the essence of the Vedas. And both texts, the Vedanta Sutra and the Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavata Purana, we'll be using them interchangeably. They begin with the same Sanskrit words, Janmadhyasya Yataha, which means Brahman, or the absolute truth, is that from which or from whom everything has emanated.
And this is interesting because some people might challenge and say, well, what makes you think that the Srimad Bhagavatam really does capture the essence of the Vedanta Sutra? And what makes you think that Vyasadeva had that purpose when he wrote it? Well, he started it with exactly in the same way, with the same motivation and impetus. He starts it with these words. He not only talks about how in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it gives a report on how he came to produce the Srimad Bhagavatam, but it also starts in the same way. And that's very significant.
Mm-hmm. We've got a nice quote here. Does anyone want to read it out? This is from the Srimad Bhagavatam itself, the 12th canto, chapter 13, verses 11 to 12. Ramananda, you want to unmute and go for it?
Yeah. This Bhagavatam is the essence of all Vedanta philosophy because its subject matter is the absolute truth, which, while non-different from the spirit soul, is the ultimate reality, one without a second. The goal of this literature is exclusive devotional service unto that supreme truth.
Right, so what we're getting into here is what is actually the subject matter of the Srimad Bhagavatam now. We kind of touched on it from a philosophical, contextual place, but what is it actually going into? What is it pointing to? And here we have listed in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, also in the Bhagavatam as well. There are 10 main kind of umbrella topics that the Srimad Bhagavatam touches on. Or not even touches on, explains in detail. We have the creation of the ingredients of the cosmos. Sounds cool. The creations of Brahma, the maintenance of the creation, special favor given to the faithful, impetuses for activity, prescribed duties for law-abiding men and women, men meaning, human race, a description of the incarnations of the Lord, the winding up of the creation, liberation from gross and subtle material existence, and lastly, the ultimate shelter, the supreme personality of Godhead. So, I mean, when I saw this list, I thought this is pretty awesome, because any kind of questions that one may have about, themselves, the nature of reality, the workings of the world, they're all explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam. I mean, just these topics themselves, it's kind of like, that's why when we started the presentation, I kind of said it's like an encyclopedia. There's so much information, which I think is incredible.
I'm always dumbfounded when I see this, because just imagine a book that claims to address these kinds of topics. And it's just a commonplace statement for the Srimad Bhagavatam, but this is what it's addressing. But coming from outside that tradition, this is an extraordinary claim. It's almost unbelievable that a single book could even dare to approach topics like this. But that's what the Srimad Bhagavatam does, and it does it so eloquently and elaborates on each of the topics so wonderfully. It's the most outstanding piece of literature.
Yeah, that's amazing. So this is all to kind of whet everyone's appetite. That's why we're just kind of, that's why I said brief introduction, because we're going to dip into the wisdom of Bhagavatam. But now we're on to the message of the Bhagavata Purana. So visualize this setting. The son of Vyasadeva, who you can see pictured on the seat here, bluish complexion. The son of Vyasadeva is somebody called Shukadeva Goswami. And so he heard this knowledge from his father, and he shared this to somebody called Parikshit Maharaj. Now, and he's also the one in the picture who seems to actually be receiving this knowledge from Shukadeva Goswami. So who is Parikshit Maharaj? Now, very interestingly, he was the emperor of the world. Now that concept sounds a bit like, what does that even mean? But actually, if we look at the way society was structured in previous ages, we look at the administrative class, royalty, there were emperors and great kings, and Parikshit Maharaj happened to be the emperor of the world. So he's like a really, not to sound too colloquial, but like big shot, like really, really, really cool. And also to add to that, many of you may have heard of Arjuna, the great warrior Arjuna. Arjuna is the one who heard the Bhagavad Gita from Krishna himself on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Many people know the Bhagavad Gita, and Parikshit Maharaj is actually Arjuna's grandson. So just to add to how epic he is of a person. So how did he come across hearing this from Shukadeva Goswami?
Oh, yeah. So, to put it very briefly, Parikshit Maharaj, he was cursed by a young Brahmana boy to die in 7 days. And on hearing this, he could have counteracted this curse actually, but he was such a great soul, he decided to, hand over the responsibilities, the administration of his administration of government of the world. He handed that over, and he decided to go to the banks of the Ganges and meditate and fast for those 7 days to prepare himself for moving on. And it was during that assembly, well, I say assembly, what happened is when he went there, because he's such, as Rishma said, is such a big shot, all these great sages and important people came and assembled at that place where he was sitting on the banks of the river to witness and pay tribute to him and to participate in these last days of the great Parikshit Maharaj. And it was in the midst of that assembly, there appeared Shukadeva Goswami, who Rashma just spoke about. And he was such an exalted personality that everyone deferred to Shukadeva Goswami. And it was at that moment, Shukadeva Goswami decided to speak the Srimad Bhagavatam for the benefit not just of Parikshit Maharaj, but for the whole world. That's, in a nutshell, that's what's going on in that picture.
Yes, and we've got some quotes from the Bhagavatam. Just, you know, the Bhagavatam puts it so eloquently, better than we ever could. So does anyone want to read these? You can just go ahead and unmute. Rupa Vilaspuri, yes.
Go ahead.
Message of the Bhagavata Purana. Sri Vyasadeva delivered it to his son, who is the most respected among the self-realized, after extracting the cream of all Vedic literatures and histories of the universe. Do you want to do the next one too?
Yes, yeah, just to say, so that's the son that is referring to is Shukadeva Goswami. And now we're introducing a new saint. There's a new saint on the scene. So yes, please, Sharbahari, go ahead.
O learned Brahmanas, when Shukadeva Goswami recited Bhagavatam there in the presence of Emperor Parikshit, I heard him with rapt attention, and thus, by his mercy, I learned the Bhagavatam from that great soul and powerful sage. Now I shall try to make you hear the very same thing as I learned it from him and as I have realized it.
Thank you. So yes, a new saint on the scene. Who is this I? Who is speaking here? And that is, the speaker is Sutta Goswami. So Sutta Goswami was actually in the assembly when Shukadeva Goswami was speaking to Maharaj Parikshit, or when they were having this conversation about these topics. And he then shared this with the sages of Naimisharanya.
And the context of this second assembly is that these great sages, so all the great sages of the world, they gathered together because they understood that a new era was dawning. And it was an era that would be characterized by a lot of, you could say, it was going to become a very non-conducive period for mankind, because the atmosphere, the qualities of this age that was arriving was going to be very disruptive for spiritual progress. So they gathered to investigate and inquire, how can we do good for the people of all these future generations, all these unfortunate people to take birth at this time where spiritual culture, spiritual knowledge would be gradually, would become less prominent in the mind of people. And they would become less inclined naturally by the influence of the age. And they wanted to do good for the people of the world. And they decided to undertake 1,000-year sacrifice. What an extraordinary thing to decide. And in that assembly, there was going to be discourses as well about spiritual knowledge. And Sutta Goswami, at this time, he was an elderly sage, and he was invited to take the seat of honor and speak on these extraordinary questions that would be raised. And he would respond through the Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is what's being captured in this text.
Yes, yeah, I like how you phrase that, because yes, these sages were posing questions, and we've got some little snippets here. First, we have explain to us. So these are the sages addressing Sutta Goswami. Explain to us in an easily understandable way what you have ascertained to be the absolute and ultimate good for the people in general. That's what Sankarsana was saying.
I mean, what a question, isn't it? I mean, what a request. I don't think I've ever read a book that started by saying, can you explain to us what is the absolute and ultimate good of the people in general? I mean, you get hit with a statement like that and you realize you're not dealing with ordinary literature.
And not dealing with ordinary personalities. There are many varieties of scriptures, and in all of them, there are many prescribed duties, which can be learned only after many years of study in their various divisions. This is almost like a reference to the Vedic knowledge or the Vedas that we were looking at, little flowchart thingy. Therefore, O sage, please select the essence of all these scriptures and explain it for the good of all living beings, that by such instruction, their hearts may be fully satisfied.
And that's something very unique as well. That the way I see this is, even though we're talking about scriptures here, there is something, fundamentally non-sectarian about this particular treatise, the Srimad Bhagavatam, because what it's doing is it's actually extracting the essence from all scriptures. What the Bhagavatam purports to offer is knowledge that is at the heart of all spiritual traditions, all religious motivations and knowledge, and all of them, what is deep at their core is going to be extracted in the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam and elaborated for the benefit of everyone. So there's something very wonderful about that. And what's unique there as well is that it's not just going to be a statement of religious rites and practices and things you ought to do and things you ought to avoid. You'll find some of that in the pages of the Bhagavatam, but at its core, the essence of the Srimad Bhagavatam is a philosophical exposition about the ultimate reality and our place within that ultimate reality, and the purpose of life and how we should respond to the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So it's even the structure of it that Rashma talked about, questions and answers and raising concerns and elaborating and responding.
And lots of different personalities as well.
This flow and ebb of knowledge, it's so accessible. It's not just injunctions that you ought to follow in a religious kind of, without wanting to sound too harsh, in a dogmatic kind of way. No, you don't want to, that's not what the Srimad Bhagavatam is about. The Bhagavatam is a rational and powerful, impactful exposition of spiritual knowledge. So that's what's being said here.
Oh, one more. We are eager to learn about the personality of Godhead and his incarnations. Please explain to us those teachings imparted by previous masters, acharyas, for one is uplifted both by speaking them and hearing them. So this emphasizes the tradition that we are grounded in, this idea of a teacher-student chain or parampara in preserving this wisdom, Vedic knowledge. So now, yes, let's touch on the message of the Bhagavata Purana. So as we said, there's many, like the pages are just filled with many conversations between royalty, yogis, sages, all concerning the perfection of life. It's such a wonderful read. It really is. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, or the Bhagavata Purana, is actually promoting bhakti, devotion to Krishna. So it discusses the nature of God, of ourselves, our relationship with God, and the process of realizing it. So it targets that end, but the way in which it establishes how and why it's important it's incredible. It's done so, like you said, it's very accessible and it's very wonderful to read. We've got some more quotes in our message of the Bhagavata Purana. Does anyone want to read this one? Everyone's waiting for someone else, aren't they? Go ahead.
Sure. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
Thank you. So beautiful. And there's a lot to unpack in this verse, but as I said, and this is also the reason why we didn't actually provide any answers to the questions that we gave that were posed by the sages, because like I said, this is just like to whet everyone's appetite for what's to come when we actually dive deep into the Bhagavatam itself. But yeah, I mean, when we read this, every sentence is just like, wow, wow, wow. There's just so much in it. So yes, this is just to everyone to get a little bit of a taste of what's to come. Ramananda, do you want to read this one?
Srimad Bhagavatam is the spotless Purana. It is most dear to the Vaishnavas because it describes the pure and supreme knowledge of the Paramahamsas. This Bhagavatam reveals the meaning for becoming free from all material work, together with the processes of transcendental knowledge, renunciation, and devotion. Anyone who seriously tries to understand Srimad Bhagavatam, who properly hears and chants it with devotion, becomes completely liberated.
Yeah, even more good. That smile, Ramananda, that says it all. That's exactly how I feel just reading it. It's again, I appreciate there's a lot going on there that we're not necessarily explaining, but we get it. We get an idea of how incredible this literature is. And one more, Jagapala, do you want to read? You're just on mute.
By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. And loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact.
Thank you. And so this verse is, as we were saying, the Bhagavatam points to points to bhakti, loving devotional service to Krishna. And this verse is giving us an insight into that.
Great. So
that was like I'm sure there's a term for it, like a little taster, a teaser, trailer. That's more for movies, but just what are we actually diving into here? So yes, hopefully everybody is inspired for our new monthly sessions. Here we've got a picture of Srila Prabhupada reading the Bhagavatam. You spoke about Prabhupada earlier.
Yeah, Srila Prabhupada did a monumental service, unique in the history of the world, because he was the person who took the Srimad Bhagavatam and took it overseas, crossed the ocean with it, and he spread it all over the world. Before Srila Prabhupada, we had no access to the Srimad Bhagavatam. But in his expertise and his lifetime of experience and meditation on the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam, he was able to communicate this. He was able to do this great work. I remember hearing a funny story, and I wish I had the record of where I read this, but one member of our tradition met a person in India, a scholar, just someone he met in the course of his studies, and this person told him that he had an aspiration to translate the Srimad Bhagavatam, because he felt that would be such a great contribution to the academic community for him to do that. And he was engaged in that work already. He had started translating, and he was doing it very, he wasn't doing what Srila Prabhupada did. Because when you look at how Srila Prabhupada presented Srimad Bhagavatam, you've got the original Sanskrit, you've got the transliteration of that Sanskrit, you've got the translation for each word in that Sanskrit, then you've got an actual translation in English, and then you've got a commentary by Srila Prabhupada himself, making this accessible to those of us from the English-speaking world. And this person wasn't doing it like that. He was just kind of translating the Bhagavatam itself. So this devotee said, but you know that this is, there's already an English Srimad Bhagavatam. He showed this person what existed, the Srimad Bhagavatam that we have. And the person was completely gobsmacked and heartbroken as well, because when he realized what Srila Prabhupada had done in such a short space of time, and he had spent, so many years just doing a small part of it, and doing it not nearly to the standard that Srila Prabhupada had done it. He was devastated. But he was also stunned at what Srila Prabhupada had achieved, which is no easy feat.
No, definitely not. Srila Prabhupada is incredible, and indebted to him for this great, for giving us access to this knowledge and literature. Here's another picture that I really like of Srila Prabhupada with a dictaphone, and he's narrating.
He would wake up in the middle of the night, and he would open up this book that he had in a very tiny font with commentaries from all the great teachers, the great acharyas in our tradition on the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he would relay that to us. He would speak it out. That's how he was producing his books. I mean, nowadays, if I have to write an essay, it takes me weeks just thinking about the sentence, and is there a better way to say that sentence, and
that's Sankarsana. It takes me triple the time it takes. So.
But Srila Prabhupada is just speaking. He's just speaking this transcendental knowledge, and what he produces is so extraordinary. So it's this is just a snapshot of history here, in the making.
Yes, and I hope everybody is inspired and eager to hear more. And like I said, there'll be lots of presenters and lots of different ways of presenting.
On the last Thursday
of every month, we'll post them on YouTube. And if anybody's interested in getting their hands on this literature, just get in touch with us. Our email address is in the little comment thingy below. So we'll stop sharing and we can open up for discussion.